I genuinely do think DnS can super play well, actually.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear about uThermal stealing your milk. But I guess that's just the way it goes sometimes. He's the big Terran on the playground today. In the bottom left, he is the blue Terran representing Team Liquid. He's uThermal.
And spawning in the top right, as our red Protoss hailing from France, it is DnS. I guess it's worth giving a little bit of background on DnS for those that don't entirely know him too much. Even though he isn't a newcomer at all, he's been around for a while, unlike somebody like Dark, you know, that is a newcomer. But DnS, a few years ago, he was absolutely vying for one of the top positions as a Protoss in Europe. Like, I really mean that. Like, Showtime has been the solid Protoss for a long time, but DnS, Drogo, it felt like there was quite a few Protosses in France that were all hot on Showtime's tails. Lilbo at this time as well. Like, DnS was very, very good, and while he's not always in the limelight, he's always one of those Protosses that you know absolutely can do very well. And against somebody like uThermal, given that he is a very solid Protoss, not a cheeser at all, he's a true macroer, he can be very scary to go up against.
Yeah, and that's something that I think when we talk about what makes these guys dangerous players, that's the thing, is you can kind of break that at any time. uThermal, when I think about him, I think about all the times where he'd have like a really good close macro game with somebody over the years, and then just be like, boom, all right, game 2, I'm just going to go for some crazy proxy Reaper shenanigans. I'm going to just, pedal to the metal, try and just smash your face in. And that's because he's a player that's also been known for his micro over the years, right? He's not necessarily someone who just sticks to one thing. He's quite a talented player and really likes to mix it up whenever possible, but not too much, not going off the deep end or anything like that.
No, I think you're absolutely right. He's definitely had sick micro, which is maybe being reason that he can go with some of the strategies that he does. I remember like the 3x Reaper days, he was amazing. But yeah, one thing that I found really hard about uThermal recently, he took a little bit of a break, and sometimes when players have breaks, they can come back very refreshed, which I think that helps players like uThermal a lot. And secondly, he does a lot of unorthodox builds that he has very different follow-ups to every time. Like, you cannot predict what he's going to do, and he has such a wide array of things that he can do. Makes him incredibly hard to go up against. And DnS here, he will be scouting with this Adept to start things off while getting a Stargate on the way just to confirm what he's up against. But he goes for Phoenix. He's going to be in a rough spot. Goes for an Oracle against 3x. It's still not a bad situation for uThermal.
No, I mean, the Oracle is obviously not going to contest 3 racks of bio on its own, but if he can keep uThermal pinned back in his base, potentially delay any sort of early attack that he'd want to go for, then you start to see where that kind of strategy ends up being a bit nice. Buying time is always going to be important because, Marines, he's got the stim coming in. He's playing aggressively on this ramp too. He's like, I don't even want the Adept to be able to throw its shade out from far enough away that it could reach, the main base if it was to go that far, but he's, as you can see, he's going a little back and forth, little tappy toes on that natural expansion. Of course, you don't actually want the Adept to go through there and start killing your workers. But here is that Oracle and a little Phoenix follow-up on the backside.
Right, so uThermal's done a good job of just kind of pretending that he's not doing what he's doing, which is going for a 3 racks. He kept like his Marine count sort of hidden behind the 5. And now DnS flies in here. He's like, oh, it is a 3 racks. So he actually goes for 1 Phoenix only here and goes straight into Oracles again. And that's always kind of one of those situations where it's like, damn, that Phoenix, it's almost useless at this point in time, because what does 1 Phoenix really accomplish? Are you going to lift up a Marauder when this push comes? Because it is going to be a 3 racks push. And yeah, that's already a little bit of a win there for uThermal.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of bio that's moving across the map now. It's going to have stim, combat shields, and like you were saying, a single Phoenix doesn't really do anything. Pick up 1 unit, like you said. There's not even medevacs with this attack because of how fast it's coming. So the value that you can gain from that is quite low. Maybe you'll try to tank a couple of hits with it, move it up to the front. I don't really know. You're going to be relying on the shield batteries here alongside the handful of sentries. I don't think he's in position to hit that ramp, though, immediately. He's going to come up onto it now as uThermal gets a few Marines up top, so shaves off a bit of the fat from the army at the ramp. but nothing too much else happening just yet. You got to be very patient with the movement here, and he's just going to go home recognizing, okay, those batteries are done now. There's a couple extra warp ins. I don't want to handle that. And we've also got a few stasis wards. So DNS, I mean, he's checking off all the boxes on what he needs to do to be safe against a build like this and get his third up.
I got to commend DNS quite a lot, actually. That situation, if that army gets close to you, it's actually kind of scary. Like, if uThermal ran along the left side of the map, maybe he could have got something done. Nice reactions with these oracles as well. Like, that could have been a dead oracle if he wasn't paying super attention, and uThermal tried to get him off guard a little bit. But, yeah, so far, all the boxes being checked from DNS, as you put it, and I'm very impressed with this Protoss play. Ice cold, no mistake so far.
Yeah, biggest things keeping our eyes on as lands another revelation on the army. Of course, we'll keep our eyes on that. Ben, he's going for armor first on his engineering bay. Does not have +1 attack. Did not get it first. I don't think we've seen that a tremendous number of times. But I guess we'll talk a little bit more about that later. He's going to add 6 more warp gates. I was going to say once he gets a couple medevacs out, that's when this army still gets scary, because it's not like he has the AOE army to fight with. He's still going to rely on gateway units and his batteries and the oracles to give him vision. Because the medevacs are coming out and he's getting ready for a drop. But yeah, that is interesting with the infantry armor first.
I would love to go into detail about how this could somehow not be a mistake, but it's an error. It's an error. Like, I want to make uThermal look great, you know, I do, but going armor first.
I love you,
yeah, when he realizes that, he's going to be like, oh, really? Or maybe he's figured something out, and it's like, my Marines can survive 1 extra hit from these zealots now, and that's exactly what I wanted.
700 IQ.
Yeah, I don't know. By the way, DNS, he's spotting around. He's like, okay, I see this army moving out, but I think he only spotted 1 medevac. You can see how he's moving with this 1 Phoenix and like just this probe on the right side. Maybe he'll get a scout off. Maybe he won't, though. I mean, that is very unfortunate, but nice timing by uThermal.
He's got all the focus on this left side army, you know, through virtue of landing all those revelations, and as you said, the probe missing the drop. So he's going to move that army towards the third, but the double medevac drop hits the main base at the same exact time. And this army is still a lot of stalkers, so if he could get close to it, of course he could deal a lot of damage, but the overcharge is going to get used on a battery in the main. There is a photon cannon there too, so actually a pretty solid defensive. He has a setup for it, but still losing 10 probes off the target fire from uThermal definitely hurts a lot for DNS. 60 probes to 58 SCVs. uThermal's going and grabbing that third base now. We talk about, of course, if he gets the mules out and he's able to get a lot of mining going after that worker damage, it's going to be really nice for him. Actually, he picks up one of the oracles at the last second there on the right too. So solid harass. And I think the most important thing you're worrying about when you take that third base is whether or not a counter or anything like that's happening. I don't think that's in the cards for the moment.
No, certainly isn't. And uThermal to start off that +1 attack, and that's one of those moments where it's like, oh yeah, that okay, that could have, like, he could have dealt a lot more damage, but yeah, we'll see how this game goes on, because right now I don't think anybody's got the super lead. Definitely quite a few probes went down, but uThermal had to deal quite a bit of damage there, because like we look at the tech of DNS, he's got 2 Colossus on the go. If he survives this next push, he's in pretty decent shape for the late game.
Yeah, I mean, double Colossi on the way, like you're talking about, that's a big power spike to be waiting on and kind of baiting at the ramp, forcing a couple of the force fields and just creating that space is so nice. He doesn't feel comfortable trying to just load everything up and jump into the main. And by the way, there are quite a few stalkers DNS left there in case he tried that. So he has his army split up. He's thinking about the potential that uThermal could try to just slip around towards the main with a big drop. He's got great vision on him, though, with these constant revelations being dropped on the army. So he doesn't really have that opportunity. He's been stalked the whole way through with a full vision of uThermal's army for DNS. He's just done a really good job keeping tabs. And now both Colossi are finishing. So suddenly that Marine heavy army, Benjamin, it gets a little bit more squishy.
Certainly does, and the +1 armor will not save it from those Colossus. They're soon going to have +2. Okay, uThermal Lance is still not done yet, so he has to be kind of careful, because there isn't a big army enforcing this, and uThermal's doing the right thing here. Even though DNS's army is probably better in a straight-up fight, especially with shield batteries, when it gets spread out, that's when the bio can really whittle you down.
Yes, and just constant revelation poking on the army. At no point is uThermal able to move around without being traced by DNS. And he had all this momentum. He's putting on all this pressure at the start, but we're going to be up to the 4 Colossus mark. And at that point, if you're not making a serious investment into Vikings, you're in some trouble, because we already know there's a lot of meat on the ground. There's a tremendous number of zealots. He has plenty of sentries, and 18 stalkers to provide the air support means that if he only has a couple of Vikings, they're going to die very quickly. So uThermal needs to be very deliberate with the army movement from this point forward, especially as Archons get added. I mean, DnS, he's rounded out that army composition. He's got his 4th base up. He's looking pretty damn good, Muslim.
Yeah, and this is kind of what we were talking about, right? Like, DnS is a very solid macro player. He's not this guy that cheeses and does that kind of stuff. He's just got solid fundamentals. And right now, DnS is looking to defend, to get uThermal away. This isn't uThermal's full army. He is ahead in supply, and he's taken a pretty good trade against these zealots. And DnS, he can't run too far out, because we see on the other side of the map, there is a big splodge of blue moving over to the vulnerable side of the map for DnS.
Yeah, I think for uThermal, you need to keep this right side army alive while the attention gets drawn to the left. I think the War Prism was just flying past the Viking, not able to take more than just a few of its shields. There is a battery with a few cannons at this base, but he's going to force the recall, as this is not enough zealots to take care of all of it. And that's all. Well, we talk about 4 Colossi. There they are, them laser beams, microwaving some Marines and Marauders outside of that 4th, and the right side drop gets away. We see those Widow Mines get a couple pot shots on his way back, though. Nice funny, back and forth, Ben.
Yeah, it is funny how they went for their upgrades in very different ways, but they're going to end up with the exact same set of upgrades, 2-1, 2-1. I do like this addition by DnS, though, because realizing that this game is going to be a bit of a tug of war, maybe on 2 sides, always helps having the addition of DTs rather early. And it's been something that I've seen a lot of Protosses do, where they, instead of getting like the double AoE, be it Colossus Disruptor or Colossus High Templar or whatever, you name it, they go for the DTs first, which I think definitely makes things a lot more problematic.
And tries to get that mine before it can burrow, but instead we'll lose some shields on the Stalkers. And that could be nice if there was a fight happening immediately. But there's a big scan for uThermal, and he says, okay, I see your army trying to break down the rocks. You probably want to try, maybe come kill me. I think there's another scouting unit that's just been taken out on top of that ramp. So he scans the army again, and I wasn't sure if he was going to try and like force him to come back home, but instead he's going to bring everything back. I'm not sure how easy it's going to be to defend this base. The command center kind of limits where uThermal's army can be spread on that southeast side, and we'll throw an EMP, but there does not appear to be enough Vikings to even try to just trim this. He's going to go for a big surround from the northeast as well. The Vikings are spread out, taking a couple of spread shots against the Colossus, so they're not going down quite as fast as maybe he wanted, but the SCVs get pulled. He gets through the Archons. Last Colossus standing in the back with just a handful of Stalkers and Zealots to keep it alive. Will be forced to retreat, and you know what? He lost 17 SCVs here to Muslim, but he still got a tremendous amount of the Marine Marauder, and if he gets up on top of that Colossus, it is going to die so fast. Does he have enough firepower to keep the Warpins going and stop uThermal from pushing to that 4th?
I mean, that's the question, right? Like, uThermal maybe feels a bit vulnerable here. He did have a lot of command centers building still, and even though he lost quite a bit of his economy there, he's still absolutely in it, especially if this does go to the macro game. Those goes came in clutch, by the way, with all those EMPs. I am a little surprised, though, that he didn't push the issue a little bit, but that just shows to me that he's very confident in the late game. But, allowing DnS another breath of fresh air, I'm not sure that was the move, but we'll see.
I definitely felt like he could have tried to push it a little bit further, but uThermal, he's thinking about, potentially overextending, giving up his lead, and it's never a way that you want to lose a game. Obviously, you feel like you take a good fight, you try to push towards that 4th, try to get some damage back after you lost workers, and all it turns into is, getting backstabbed and losing everything because your army just barely wasn't enough. But as you're talking about, those DTs are going to be slipping in while the Stalkers poke the front. So he's trying to distract, get his attention, and Ben, they're spreading out nicely across the bases. There are missile turrets here, but he's still going to need to move units to all those expansions to deal with them. And I'm sure there's going to be a couple blind spots that these DTs are maybe trying to hide in. Their forces, 1 scan in the natural. The 2 DTs in the main base actually did kill the turret, so forced to use another scan there. Although, if I'm being honest, on 5 bases, the scans are not the hardest thing for him to pull up, so it's not as damaging as if he had brought them out earlier, but he's accomplished the task of keeping uThermal in his base and buying more time. I mean, now the Colossi are back, he's got Disruptors. It's going to be a whole different ball game than that last big fight to Muslim.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, uThermal's still the one that's maxed, and he does have 6 go, soon to be 8 on the field, and this army of DnS, it's only got 1 armor upgrade so far. And if you get a big bio flank, especially with having 0 armor, well, that can get pretty damn problematic for the Protoss, especially when you're relying on those disruptors. This drop was spotted by that ET. DnS is like, all right, I'm going to start rushing on home, and these Widow mines,
man, these
doing
mines,
a good job of scouting.
Yeah, you talk about whether or not they actually kill things like some of these bigger units. It'll be a lot of shields and maybe a little bit of real health damage, but the vision, just being able to keep tabs on the Protoss army by seeing them walk around like that is really nice. Disruptor shots are going to go out to clear some of these Marauders. Almost traded out for one of the disruptors.
Oy.
Of course, that doesn't, okay. That was the one that was almost dead. Gets a couple juicy EMPs on the rest of the disruptors. So brings the health down very low. Is going to spread out on top of the ramp. And this is a little bit back towards what we were talking about earlier with the flanks, whether or not you have that spread. uThermal would prefer to stay spread on top of the ramp, but of course he can't really apply the pressure he needs to from there. So I like what he's doing now, right? Send a half of his army towards that third, force him to come up the ramp and fight against the entire full spread. This is an incredibly difficult position for DnS to engage from, especially without any way to flank. He's going to go for a counterattack towards the natural, but the rest of the army is going to try to attack. EMP hits absolutely everything. It's a full spread for uThermal across the entire breadth of this army. The Colossi are getting blasted down. The Marauders able to focus onto the disruptors, and that's GG. uThermal takes game number 1.
It is crazy, right? How that spread against that, like initially you look at the army, you're like, Disruptor's Colossus, they're going to take it, right? And it's like, well, no, not if you do it like that, because that concave that uThermal had spread out all that AoE as much as it could. He didn't go for the Vikings and stuff to deal with the Colossus. He was just like, you know what? I'm going to have so much ground and pound. Like 8-9 ghosts were in his army as well, just dealing with everything. It was just very, very solid play by uThermal. And yeah, he micros TVP so well in this late game situation.
And he controlled the engagement beautifully, right? He fought on his own terms. I really felt like there was a big chance for, if things were going to go poorly for uThermal, it was going to be on that defense of the third, right? It's like you have the command center kind of taking up a huge amount of your space. The Protoss army was spread on top, but as you pointed out, he landed those juicy EMPs, and he did split about 30 supply off for the northeast corner flank. But man, getting DnS to walk up that ramp into that full spread of bio with all the ghosts ready to EMP, and that was absolutely filthy. It's like if you don't have your recall, like how do you actually even try to deal with that? Because if you do recall, then that fourth base is going to die too. You'll just go down the ramp and kill that if you leave. So it's like damned if you do, but even more damned if you don't, I guess, kind of situation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the second map will be Blackburn. Like, it doesn't get a lot easier for DnS, because this is one of those maps that's a little tricky, I think, when you go up against Protoss, or for Protoss going up against Terran. Scouting's very difficult. The amount of things that they can do with like a drop into your main with Hellions and stuff. The main base is massive. Trying to have a pylon in all the correct locations there can be tricky as well. It's just a bit of a rough one, honestly. That being said, it's also hard for a Terran to scout exactly what the Protoss is doing. They can also have their own shenanigans, but it's a tricky map to attack on. Protoss can get up to 3 bases pretty nicely. There's only a few avenues where you have to put shield batteries and defend. I think this is going to be a good one between them.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, Blackburn, you talk about it, that is definitely a bit of a tougher map to deal with some Terran shenanigans, though. If he goes for the drops directly across, you have a pretty quick path to get there. At the same time, Protoss players are aware of that, so we'll just have to see how well he handles it as we load in to game number 2 for our first series of the day here at the DreamHack Masters. I hope you're all having a lovely morning. If you're from out west like me, or if you're in Europe, I hope you're having a great evening, afternoon. In the bottom left, we have the red Protoss player trailing 0-1. He is DnS.
And spawning over in the bottom right, representing Team Liquid, it is uThermal.
And, Ben, I guess we can conclusively say now, I have never seen a professional game of StarCraft 2 where a Terran went armor before +1 attack and lost. I've never seen it fail to win, Benjamin. So there you go. Write that one down in your little orange notebooks, and keep that one close to your heart, Terran bros out there. The +1 armor rush is taking over.
Yeah, maybe Beyond was onto something, where he kept getting armor above attack every time. Much to the dismay of a lot of us dudes watching, being like, why does he do this and still win? Like, even when I do it correctly, it doesn't work out for me. And it's just very, very, very frustrating. But yeah, I'm looking at this and I'm like, even with that kind of error, I'm curious how much damage uThermal would have got done with attack first. But if he does it again, Nate, like if he goes armor again and it's like, oh, what's going on kind of thing, yeah, then he's onto something, I guess.
Hey, you never know. I think if people talk about, they're like, okay, well, the game doesn't get changed as much. It's where we're still on a lot of the same maps. There's a couple of things that can happen, right? You have your stew of builds, right? The meta game is like this melting pot of everybody kind of brings their strategies and their ideas, and that shapes the way that people play. But eventually, we give it enough time, Benjamin, it can get a little bit stinky, right? You can start to see some weird stuff come out that maybe nobody had ever considered before, because there's simply been too much time for people to not try and mix a few other random things in. So whether it's a serious change or not remains to be seen. It gives me a nice little throwback to when I think Flash would just never get armor upgrades, right? He'd get like the 4.5 minute +1 and get an armory as soon as his factory was done and just go straight for +3 with 0 armor. And hey, if people are still figuring stuff out and working out new things, I think that's the best possible thing that could happen for the game personally.
I remember Cloud used to do that too with a very fast +3 on the engineering bay, and I was always like, but what about? And he was like, no, this is better every time. And I couldn't argue against somebody so fit in their logic. But I remember Flash as well. Whenever he went to Factory Widowmine, it'd be 2 reactors. He'd never get drilling claws. And that also, like, given that it was different back then, that confused me at the time, given that drilling claws was so good. Ooh, Dark Shrine this game. I think this is a great map. Like, this map is worse for Blink Stalker attacks than the other maps, given that it's kind of hard to bounce into the main and to the natural and whatever. It's not like a romanticide. But I like this on this map, especially with the massive open main. Makes it so DTs can hide here, there, and everywhere, and turrets can't cover the whole spot.
Yeah, and I really like it too, because if uThermal decides that he wants to get really aggressive and he doesn't cover his tracks, he's just going to be incredibly vulnerable, especially with a barracks-based build that doesn't have a super early starport. There's no medevacs just pick up and pull out option. If once you're in the middle of the field, you're just kind of stuck. So your only option then is, well, you're going to stim your units home. Are you going to just be stuck inside your base because maybe you can build a turret, but now you can't drop it. So you still can't really leave without having scans. And saving scans this early in the game, we compare it to the last game. He didn't have to worry about DTs until he had his 4th base up. Well, now he doesn't have 3 orbitals, and he doesn't have fully saturated natural either. So being forced to use those scans, obviously he could die to DTs early too. That's still on the table. So it's a whole different scenario for uThermal to try and defend against this. And he's going to move out right as that prism arrives.
If he's watching his army now, he could see that blur. I do love the fact that he goes for this wall off every time, by the way. So that DT at the front can't actually get in, Nate. I think it's really smart to do. Obviously, if you're against Stalkers, it can work against you. But in this situation, it's great. And look at that. The turret in the main, it's actually done in time. This Warp Prism's like, oh, well, that was nice timing by you. And that DT at the front as well hasn't been able to get in. Does force a big repair and a chaos repair. But let's see what uThermal can get done on DnS's side of the map, actually.
He does a little alley-oops himself over the wall with the prism. And there are some force fields. He kind of shoots down the gateway wall. There's not a tremendous amount to defend, but he missed so much mining time with that too. This other DT kind of gets baited by the SCVs into the turret. So that's a huge save. That's actually a huge save for uThermal, as now he just has to worry about being aggressive and even trading out this bio. If he's killing the expensive important units, that's very nice. He's only going to get 2 probes so far. 3's not bad, but the worker difference ends up being, I mean, it kind of feels almost like a normal TVP in terms of the setup after this. Am I crazy, Muslim?
It actually is, weirdly enough. Like, the Terran is behind 8-ish workers, which is fine. The Protoss doesn't have a 3rd base on the way, though. That's actually good for the Terran. I really think that wall off against Protoss helps so much. And DnS, losing the DTs and not being able to have, like, 2 Archons immediately after this definitely thwumps his strategy as follow-up a little bit. But, yeah, it's got to be
the Archon. He's bringing the Archon over. He's looking for some more damage.
Yeah.
The Archon, Stalker, Adept, Drop, Harass. Not the most standard of strategies that you'll hear about in this day and age. But I suppose without medevac production, even if all it does is force the stim, he's damaging the bio, and then when the medevac finishes, it's going to have less and less energy since it will have to immediately start healing, which I guess may take a little bit of wind out of the sails on the first push, but nothing really insane happening so far. We do have, for everybody out there that hasn't had an anxiety attack like me last game, he is going +1 attack instead of armor first. And here's the Archon, just taking a couple pot shots, restoring the shields, and going in for more.
Yeah, I think they're both handling this really well. Like, uThermal's been forced to make some extra turrets as well because of this warp prism. But yeah, you can see, like, just one Archon can actually deal with quite a little force of bio, especially with that medevac. So if he had a second one still alive, that would have been great for him. DnS behind all this, he's getting up to Colossus tech, which is good. He's got his third base established, which is good. I actually think DnS has got himself into good shape, and yet again.
Yeah, he's got to be feeling comfortable. That last game really boiled down to the positioning, the micro, and the way that the fight was controlled. But I guess what I'm trying to say is it was pretty open-ended. There's opportunities aplenty for DnS to take that game, whether it be with the juicy disruptor hit or getting himself into a spot where the Colossi could actually shoot at the core of the Marines and maybe not give uThermal the space or the time to get the spread that he was going for earlier. And this map is a little bit more of a little more choked off, a little more tight in terms of taking those spots. There's not these big open areas to spread everything around on. So he sends a drop to the main. The main army kind of pokes forward and stalls for a second, but these Marines are going to be forced out very quickly. Medevac is going to barely slip out.
You saw how uThermal was trying to navigate that, right? Like, he's got the drop at the top. He wanted to be able to deal a bit more damage, but DnS just too many units in all the right places, and uThermal wasn't able to get anything done with that. But you can never feel bad about having a drop out on the map when it's like poised to deal damage, because at some point in time, uThermal's going to be like, all right, we've got enough fights going on. I can do something with that top left drop, which is it's going to come in key if uThermal gets back in this game.
Exactly. You have to be cautious about all of the possible ways your opponent could still hit you. And speaking of, he goes to start that Nexus in the top left, immediately gets smacked down. I think if you're in uThermal's position, you absolutely don't want DnS establishing that fourth until you at least have your third base established, right? Because the last thing that you want to have happen is the Protoss gets that economy going and they start being aggressive to you while you're behind a base, and you lose the momentum, you lose the tempo control of the game. So we'll see if he can keep that pressure up. DnS brought the rest of his core army over to the top left to make sure he could get that base, and he moves back into Disruptor. So kind of interesting, right? He gets the Templar Archives, but I guess just for a couple of Archons, as we haven't even had him start Psystorm yet.
Yeah, the Brute Force army, and one weakness of it, I suppose, is when your opponent goes straight into Ghosts instead of other things, which is exactly what uThermal did. Doesn't mean that DnS is super behind or anything like that, but uThermal definitely respecting his opponent's choices here. Delayed the armory, went for the Ghosts. Absolutely the right call by him, and they're going to get ready to deal some damage to one another. I do like this pylon planting around when you are in DnS shoes.
Yes, and okay, good turnaround there. They're the slow zones outside the main base, I think, make that single missile turret a lot more terrifying than maybe in a different game. He's not going to push into there. He has the mines spread out. If we talk about takeaways from the first game, the Widow mines were huge, right? He almost never established those. Vikings are actually going to catch these bad boys, so gets the Prism. Only one DT and one Zealot make it out. That's a pretty significant loss. It takes a lot of robo time to rebuild that. 3 mines get dropped onto the third base. 5, 10, 12 probes obliterated by these robot drone monsters, Benjamin.
That is one way to get yourself more than back into the game, right? 'Cause, oh my goodness, is this... Well, I mean, that was brutal, man. And this Widow mine, it's out of vision as well of that photon cannon. Just very nice play by uThermal. He's been getting supply blocked a little bit while this has been going on, but I think for the amount of damage that he just did, totally worth it.
Yeah, he's obliterated a huge number of probes. Obviously, DnS cannot call down mules to recover that. He's just going to have to invest into rebuilding that economy. So a lot of money to be spent on workers there. But at the same time, if there's one thing we can say about disruptors, it's that, you know, they can offset even the most lopsided supply differences in games if you can land that dream shot, which is obviously a lot easier said than done. uThermal did a really good job of splitting around those in the last game, and that's pretty much how he was able to win. Just avoided almost all the disruptor shots, lost just barely a handful of bio units to them. And we know that, well, once they fire those disruptor novas, and if they miss, they don't really do anything. So they become big juicy targets to kill for a huge amount of supply and resources, as another Widow Mine drop is going to head across the field. And I almost wonder now why he hasn't invested in drilling claws. I feel like that would make this even more frustrating to play against.
It's almost like you want to get rid of the Widow Mines because they're not going to be useful in the fights. Like, obviously, if they drilling clawed, it would be great, but they're
I've
like...
just got dirty Terran thoughts in my mind, Benjamin Baker. What can I say?
Me too.
I'm
like, whenever I see that, I'm like, dropping could be even more annoying for you. And then it's like, you know, get the little finger up at the mouth and stuff. But
did I click E and kill your whole mineral line?
But yeah, look at the army by both of them as well. Like, DnS has 9 disruptors. Like, you scan that uThermal and you're like, oh, yeah, I might need to flank that from maybe like 4 sides to have a chance. Ooh!
Oh, brutal.
Those
right before the cannons. Right before the cannons finish, too. Huge shots. Gets 5 probes to boot on top of the stalkers, and that's painful. But what's the disruptor count at here? We've got 9 disruptors, 3 colossi, and he's working with a pretty big army just off 69 probes back home. As Shadow Stride for the DTs coming in, so they'll be the invisible men will learn how to jump. The Muslim.
Oh, slow zones. The ultimate counter of the disruptor. That feels good. I was looking at uThermal's army there. I was like, that's kind of small for 200 supply. And then it's like, oh, he has another almost symmetrical army or identical army over at the top. So I love the fact that he's looked at this and he's like, you know what? I know how I need to engage that to win. So I'm going to try and do it. He's just making it so difficult for DnS to be in the right spot here.
Yeah, well, how often do we get to see Terran players control 2 armies like this? They're both well-rounded. He has Vikings and Ghosts and Bio in both, and he's basically just saying, I have enough tools to take out whatever you're going to throw at me, as long as we avoid a full confrontation. So if he chases this and he thinks that this is all that there is, then that second army just comes bolting down onto the third base, and there's not really a whole lot to defend against that. Because the Disruptor is going to be great at sieging. You know, you can only run so far until you're giving up your bases and your expansions that the Protoss is attacking. But if you're fighting in the middle of the map, all you got to do is just run, and you're not really giving up too much more than a bit of ground. And because it's still at DNS's base, he's not as motivated to run away. So big EMP lands in the middle of the army. But is he going to force the issue? I'm not so sure.
I love that uThermal is just making sure that he doesn't take a bad fight here. He's looking for a big open space. Now, this is kind of the position where he could maybe collapse on his opponent or maybe wants to fight on his side of the map. He's making sure he's got no armor on these ghosts and their dying breath, but maybe this is the position he was looking for here, Nate, and he does have a drop on the other side of the map as well.
Yeah, he split that drop off as soon as the army started to retreat right from the main force. So he's just saying, okay, yeah, I'll bait you all the way back across, and this way I can just, you know, have these Marines and Marauders maybe take down this Nexus you're trying to rebuild, maybe take down the other Nexus you're trying to rebuild, but defensively warped in Dark Templar. Very smart choice for DNS. Of course, uThermal, a little bit tougher to deal with those bad boys. Just a handful of units may not even be able to snipe them. But look at what we've got going on. Despite everything that's been happening in this game, DNS is still thinking about even further down the line, as we have the air upgrades on the way, as well as the transition to carriers, which, as we all know, if you get to enough carriers, the Muslim, it always becomes a bit of a problem to try and engage into them without getting the AI all mixed up.
Certainly does. DNS has got to be a little bit careful because he knows the army is very strong. Blinks on the PF. Will he be able to get it? Does look like it. uThermal's just like,
Huge
you know
snipe.
what? I was not fast enough there to get it sorted, and uThermal's scanning this army. He's like, all right, that's potentially doable. Oh my goodness, look at this. He's getting ready for it, Nate.
Yeah, he's trying to spread out big time. The EMPs land on about half the disruptors. And we all know the Nova, it doesn't do any damage if you kill the disruptor before it pops. So if he gets those EMPs and the disruptors try to come out and take those hits, then that's going to really make his core army removal tool very exposed and weak. He can't mine off this gold base, which is a huge problem. I think it's just a bunker with 3 Marines was in the other base. These DTs are just hunting for reinforcements to kill, and they're going to get EMP'd and scanned and chased down. So I think the only thing missing there was him using a snipe from one of the ghosts to catch it on the tail end, but not cheap units to throw away either. I mean, Dark Templar don't come for free.
It's a really high level TVP, man. Like the fact that they're both being so patient. Notice how DNS is constantly sticking to walls with his army, by the way, because he knows that the weakness of his army is getting surrounded. So constantly he's utilizing this terrain, just sticking to it as much as he can, cuddling the wall, so to speak. And uThermal, he knows his army is way better out in the open, just positioned here in 3 different sections. And if he's behind those gold minerals, the disruptor shots can't go through those minerals at all. So yeah, they're both playing it very, very smart.
Yeah, indeed. I do think it becomes a slight concern over time. If you are uThermal, though, that the transition to mass carriers is something that you'll have to keep in mind, because obviously you want to have the Marines and the Ghosts to deal with the carriers, but it becomes tricky when you have to still take out the Colossi and you don't have a huge number of Vikings. So he's going to land some EMPs on the ramp, pulls back just a little bit, does not eat those big purification Novas. But +2 is going to be done for the carriers relatively soon. And I mean, when you look at it, 4 carriers, 12 Vikings, but 3 Colossi. It's not like he's going to be able to just dive on these air units in a protracted fight. The carriers are actually very well zoned by the rest of the composition that DNS has built throughout this game.
Yeah, the funny thing about the carriers, though, is they're kind of countered by ghosts and bio in really high numbers, which is exactly what uThermal has. These DTs, though, they are the thing that can definitely be a thorn in uThermal's side, because this army, it requires you to focus 110%, because one disruptor shot could mean the end of the game. So these DTs are absolutely the bit of chaos that DNS needs and wants to be utilizing.
Yeah, I think that's a very astute observation. If he spends too much time playing whack-a-mole with these Dark Templar inside of his base, which, well, he is spending a lot of time playing whack-a-mole with these Dark Templar inside of his base to Muslim, that opens up opportunity for DNS to start and do some stuff. He approaches the gold base. There's nothing there, so he's just going to send this Stalker towards that northeast expansion. He's like, I sniped this earlier. Yes, but there were 2 orbitals, so he immediately rebuilt, and almost snagging a carrier on the way out. That would have been a huge snipe for Schlappy.
It's definitely interesting to me as well that uThermal hasn't gone for any air upgrades here. Because I'm thinking that some damage upgrades would be really nice for these Vikings right now, but look how much bio he has. Like, these disruptors, they are absolutely the key for DNS. If they don't get anything happening, oh my goodness. I was getting ready for uThermal to just pounce on that, because those disruptors just went way far ahead of the army.
They were so exposed. That's absolutely terrifying. Absolutely terrifying situation to be put in. But I think that we've kind of already established in a spread out formation, just the mass of the army that uThermal has built. If it collapses, then there's a lot that it can do. And I was definitely feeling you with the disruptors moving forward there. But it makes me nervous, because I watched that Clem game where I was like, oh yeah, the bio should be able to handle like a carrier transition, right? That's not going to be the end of the world. Like just air doesn't work against Marines and Ghosts, and then it did work. And I'm like, now every time I see this happen, I just start to sweat, because the DTs are doing huge damage on the back line. So he can't even focus on the front. His expansions are getting sniped left and right. There's 8 Dark Templar on the field. He does scan and pick off the ones that were at that base. So a huge amount of resources eliminated, but DNS, he's still got plenty of money to work with.
The scariest part about this, because the supplies are super deceiving, uThermal's at 22 SCVs, man. Like, how many orbitals does he have? He has 6 orbitals, which is definitely a decent number to work with, but his economy is kind of shat on. And here, he's got an okay-ish bank to work with. He can't re-max instantly, but his army size is massive.
I love casting with you, Ben. It's always a good time. And this, I think that's a great way to put it. The 34 SCVs is not a tremendous amount to work with, but I guess if we're looking at what's the late game advantage that Terran is usually supposed to get, it's the ability to rely on those mules as a huge part of the economy. Except if he needs to use those scans for DTs every 5 seconds, it gets very nerve-wracking. DNS moves through the 2 slow zones into a huge concave for uThermal. I think he's realizing now that's not where he wants to try and force the issue. And there were some sentries, I think, mixed into this too. So if he's not able to get an EMP to start the engagement off, he might find himself cut and sliced and diced by those force fields. As is that more DT harassment? Yeah, they're continuing to shark around. Might even almost thought he was going to go for that ghost there. Not letting any of them get away.
Did you know that that sensor tower would block SCVs like that, by the way, on that base? The SCVs can't get out. But, okay, uThermal doesn't want to take this fight. This is only half his army. And what's he actually amassing here? Just tons of bio. He's still got quite a few ghosts here. The carrier count, it's stopped at 5, which isn't super duper scary. Obviously, it can deal damage. And here, uThermal, he's taking his time to go and attack the bottom. I mean, uThermal's absolutely still in this. He's still fighting, but holy crap, does DnS have a bank?
Yeah, and this is where you mentioned this a little while ago, Ben, but you talk about the compositions and that the ever increasing, I guess it's not really a crazy number of carriers. He hasn't really gotten past like 5 or 6 or so, but he doesn't have the upgrades on the Vikings. They don't have any attack upgrades. They don't have any armor upgrades. They're shooting interceptors in this fight. So here we go. I guess the right side army tries to approach, but the Colossi and Disruptors are all there ready to shut it down. The interceptors die to the Marines fast enough, but as you pointed out, money is not really the issue in this scenario, especially since if he does eventually take the gold base, it's not like he won't mine it out quickly anyway. But that northwest expansion is going to get hit again, and this army has been blanketed by so many EMPs. DnS is going to try and chase down this right side half. The Disruptor's taking a bunch of shots on the end and shooting the Novas out right as the bio disengages. uThermal's army movement and positioning has been filthy in this series. And he refuses to take a bad fight.
Yeah, and he's playing a really hard style to do as well. But I think DnS has him on his side of the map, and he's behind him. There is no retreat now for this army, unless he runs into the depths of DnS. DnS can do, like, defensive DTs, try and blink on him and do anything he wants to. But right now, this is rough. Oh, he recalled.
Yeah, he recalls a huge portion of his army to the south side because the rest of uThermal's army was headed there. And this is what I'm talking about. He's finding ways to create opportunities for himself that are it's so strange because I thought he was going to lose everything there. His army got cornered, as you said, inside of DnS's base, but he's able to use that split army setup to drag the rest of them back over. So the carriers have +3 now. Building armor is going to be the next upgrade for uThermal. He'll get building armor before +1 ship weapons. That's 3 SCVs, by the way, stuck on that little tiny spot to Muslim. 3 SCVs. He's got it's the first ever 3 supply sensor tower in StarCraft. We did it.
I'm really surprised that a single sensor tower can block like that. Honestly, with
look at those boys. Let them out. Let my people go.
It's brutal, man. It's brutal. Okay, DnS is now the one that's giving uThermal time, though. I know he's coming over here for this base, and those carriers will make short work of this. Honestly, like they deal a lot of damage, man, when they're left to rain. Although building armor is a beautiful thing as well. And uThermal, while this is going on...
Building armor is very memey.
Yeah, it's good, man. It's good. But uThermal, he's not going to sit down and just take it. He's like, all right, you're going to kill that base. I'll kill your gold base. Don't know how many times this base has died.
Yeah, it's a tragic story of that gold base. And the other tragic story of the Invisible Men. Maybe they will free those SCVs from their shackles. Oh, my God. He just sees it. He catches it. uThermal lands a fat EMP in the middle of all of them. He's going to chase these Dark Templar down. I mean, when we talk about banks, I mean, DnS still has a decent bit of money, but the gas cost of those Dark Templar, that's going to be hurting him a little bit more. Yeah, I have to wonder if he's thinking about maybe I should throw Zealots away a little bit because I have so many minerals, but keeping some mineral bank when you have this many carriers is never a bad idea either, because you know on some level you will have to replenish a lot of the interceptors after these fights.
Oh, certainly. Like, these armies are... I do like DnS's army more, but this feels like a deja vu moment, right? Like, uThermal keeps getting in this position. Oh, the Disruptors can't come into play here. And these carriers, they're kind of exposed a little bit, like... but there's just enough, isn't there? Look at them. The carrier's alone with the Colossus support on the left. Beautiful positioning by DnS, and wow,
that was fantastic.
Decisive late game fight.
Yeah, that was a beautifully orchestrated engagement. The carriers, like you were pointing out, he had them just far enough below the minerals. Like it looked like they were very close to the Marines, but they couldn't actually shoot at the carriers themselves. And we talked about those Vikings. I mean, they were made of paper mache. He didn't get any upgrades for them whatsoever. So all he was left with in that last little bit was just, okay, now I have a bunch of Marauders and Medivacs that can't kill carriers. And they were still Colossi, and disruptors. And again, like I was talking about my traumatizing flashbacks from the Clem series a couple days ago, but that's exactly what it ended up looking like. And you think to yourself, okay, I have Marines, I have Ghosts. Carriers aren't that good, right? Wrong. +3 carriers, when you don't have the proper support to deal with them, they can absolutely obliterate an army in a heartbeat.
Yeah, you're talking about the Clem Hellraiser game on Oxide or so, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was.
Did I cast that with you or? Yeah,
no, I was just watching as a spectator because I was like, oh yeah, I bet 2-0 on Clem on this, and I was like 1-0 for Clem. I'm like, nice. Then I saw that, and I was like, Clem's doing everything great with these Vikings, and it was like, oh, he lost. I was like, oh no. But yeah, I thought it was really, really cool to see. One thing that does surprise me about uThermal is his willingness to just be like, you know what, frick it, late game's where we're going. Like, I am not that guy at all. I know a lot of people are absolutely not that guy. I think I'm a big Gabe fan, a really big Gabe fan. You know, yeah, who isn't? But when I was watching his stream and he's talking about carrier transitions, he very often will be like, okay, the counter to this is BCs, and you have to immediately stop everything else you're doing, like your bio and what have you. You need to go like, I think he talks about double armory, multiple starports kind of thing. Like he really goes in, and you have to go all when I say all in, you have to go full on the air transition if you want to beat it. Because if you're fighting +3 carriers without even remotely equivalent upgrades, yeah, you're just going to get absolutely brutalized.
Yeah, well, DeMuslim, you've served me up the easiest alley-oop of my commentary career, which is that, yes, I 100% agree with Hero Marine on that. Battle cruisers dunk on carriers. You do have to have upgrades, of course. The base armor is so high, they can soak an insane amount of damage. And honestly, if you get like 12, if you can get to the point where you have as many battle cruisers as he had carriers like that, it's almost impossible to lose. But again, it comes down, I guess, to that harass, right? He took a lot of damage on the back end from the DTs and the Zealots. Maybe that's why we didn't see anything like that. He had his army that was still big, but I think that was mostly because he was avoiding the fights rather than pulling in this absurd income with 25 SCVs. I think making the transition to battle cruisers was always going to be just a little bit tough. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the reasons why uThermal's playstyle often works is because he doesn't go up against a Protoss that's willing to play as patient as DNS did. Like, you really saw what they were both going for. Like, DNS's rule of thumb was, don't take a bad fight, hug walls, make sure I don't get flanked. And he actually did it super damn well. Like, you've always got to give credit to a player realizing what the win condition is for the other player and to avoid it at all costs. uThermal got himself into kind of a bad spot, but he was trying. He was absolutely trying. He was baiting. He was trying his hardest, but his opponent never bought it. Just all around a really cool game here. And oh, DNS's camera did die. I'm sure we can maybe keep on playing for a little bit without it.
He's like, everybody needs to see me flex.
Yeah,
okay?
You need to see my face as I win this game, you know?
When I get this dub, he's going to pull out the confetti. He's going to have the shades drop down from the ceilings and be like, deal with it. So, hey, it's his time. He's on the mainstream. He wants his camera to work for production and the fans to see him get all excited as he keeps kicking butt and upsetting everybody who's making the predictions.
Actually,
more power
those are really. This reminds me of a moment of Soul, aka now Spirit. Last season, he did an interview with Showtime, and I was like, man, you need to point your webcam like more at your face because he was just like half ahead. And he was like, I'll do it in interview tomorrow, like implying he's going to win as well tomorrow. And like his opponent was, in fact, it was like in the game, I'll sort out my webcam afterwards for the interview. And it's like, you're still playing, man. You can't say that, right?
You're in the middle of the game.
Yeah. It was great. It was great. Anyhow, getting into it, third map and final map of this series. Spawning over in the bottom left of Oxide, it is DNS.
And his opponent in the Northeast, the Blue Terran player representing Team Liquid, he is uThermal.
Ooh, mixing it up is he, this game, the Barracks double gas opener. Yeah, uThermal's tricky to play against because we talked about it quite a chunk, actually, how he's not that predictable. Like the fact that he went for the double or the triple barracks thing twice in a row, and I don't hate it by any means, because it's one of those things that it's solid enough to get you into any sort of game that you like. But this kind of stuff, this can make you win games immediately, especially if your opponent doesn't know how to handle it. And DnS already this game, he went for that. Okay, he went for the most ultimate Protoss move that I hate, where you send your probe across the map, not to scout the gases or anything like that, just to harass his freaking SCV building that barracks. Aggravating, and that could bite DnS in the ass, actually. But now he scouts, and he's like, oh, okay. This is weird. And I just saw his face on the webcam as well. He was like, I don't know what's going on behind this. Is it double gas? Is it a CC? What's going on?
Yeah, it's one of those just like really awkward situations, right? It was, I'll never forget in like the old days of strategizing TVP, it was such a meta thing that even if you were going to do like the old like one racks expand, right? Like back in the 90s, you'd still sometimes have that depot half started at the ramp just so the Protoss didn't know what was going on. Were you going double gas? A, B? Were you going, you know, like a one racks expand with no gas? Most of the time, that's what you were doing, but it kind of just put a little bit of a question mark or enough of a question mark on the game. They're like, okay, well, if there is a factory, they could be proxying it because I can't get inside of his base to see. And it's not like proxy factory is that crazy of a build either. It's something that we see, you know, pretty regularly in TVP, especially if it's going to be like a Hellion drop. Sometimes they proxy Starport with it. So just putting a little bit more of that pressure that you can to force a mistake or perhaps an incorrect assumption from your opponent based on what they've been unable to scout.
Certainly. And DnS now knows that he's up against, you know, a factory in the base. Lovely positioning by uThermal here, using the high grass there to avoid that last shot of the Adept, but nice micro by DnS as well, keeping this Adept alive. And it will be a very normal follow-up by uThermal. Going to go for the Widowmine drop most likely, reactor on the barracks for those Marines. But yeah, this is just a different way of approaching TVP. Oh, nice micro by DnS.
Yeah, keeping the Reapers from getting much of anything accomplished. And back home for uThermal, we see that it looks like your standard schmandard setup. The medevac will be out in a few seconds, and we'll play Widowmine roulette with some probes and see if Roddy's 8 hits or not.
Yeah, I mean, okay, this Adept trades out for 1 Reaper. I actually like that for the Terran more than the Protoss, but hey, getting rid of Reaper can mean that you don't need like shield batteries in your bases and stuff. Will be a Raven opening now for uThermal behind it all, which is also groovy. I'm very interested in how he's going to go about this. DnS was a little bit supply blocked and producing 3 pylons at once. Definitely a little brutal.
Yeah, and I have to ask myself, that pylon does see the drop coming in, so hopefully reacts in time. He's killing the rocks at the bottom of his ramp instead of moving to catch this mine drop. That does scare me, Benjamin. He might be able to get these Widow Mines in position, or perhaps he's just going to wait. The Reaper runs up to the ramp, so pulls the Stalkers forward again. This has to be the moment to pull the trigger on this, right? Oh, he's still chilling.
It's the bait Reaper, man. It's the bait Reaper. He's, you know, uThermal in the series so far is the master baiter because he's just trying to pull these Stalkers. He's trying to pull DnS out of position. And he really, really wants to get that Widowmine drop going. But maybe he's going to wait there and just time it with a push. Like, uThermal's very good at doing 3 things at once.
Yeah. Unbelievable levels of patience. The Stalkers are as out of position as you could possibly be for the whole time. There's nothing in the natural. But he knows that if he goes in and DnS doesn't have something to really distract himself with, then we probably will split the workers, right? You know, like that's if you're a pro level Protoss and you can't manage that one thing happening in front of you, then you're going to have some struggles in general. So the Reaper goes into the main, sees the Templar Archives, I believe, finishing up next to the Nexus, and he's still just holding the mine drop. Fascinating. We have the Raven with the Marines to defend back home. There have been Dark Templars in each game in this series so far. So actually, I'm with you on the Raven. Very groovy move. I love it as long as it doesn't die. But it's a switch up from DnS. He's going straight for Storm, which we haven't seen at all in the first 2 games.
Yeah, I mean, I like the Storm choice, man. Like, has to recall those Stalkers back home to deal with what's happening on the map. But yeah, uThermal here going for the Widowmine drop sneakily on 1 base. High Templars serve multiple purposes. Like, A, Storm is great against the bio. But B, getting a feedback on that Raven, ooh, that can ruin all this build-up time for uThermal.
It's like the most... It really is just a super metagamey move, it feels like. He's like, okay, I've gone DTs. I went DTs even earlier in game 2. You have a Raven? Oh, great. Now I can just build a High Templar and not go for DTs. Feedback your Raven, and I can do DTs in the late game. Because, I mean, how often do we actually see the Terran player keep the Raven alive the whole time? It flies in front of the army on its own pretty easily if you're not micromanaging it a lot. And as you said, it's a juicy target for feedback. So if uThermal's able to manage it correctly, then we know anti-armor missile. You put Zealots into negative armor, and they basically, I mean, they fry easier than chicken nuggets.
You know what also the feedback is good for? It actually has the range to hit that medevac in the bottom. So that medevac in the bottom is technically on a clock, because if DnS wants to, he can go kill that now with the feedback. Like, it's the only thing that has range besides air units. So yeah, kind of awesome. If he goes and does it now, that'd be a 200 IQ. But yeah, uThermal's going to start moving out now while doing a drop on the far left side of the map. Oh, ballsy blink. Baited, mate.
Baited. Outsmarted. Oh, grabs the medevac on the way out, though. So, he strikes back. He actually does still have some vision, it looks like. Widow Mines blow up on the 3rd. 5 probes for, you know, as you said, he's kind of just had it on a timer, so I guess it's not too bad. Zealot counterattack is going to hit. Storm is done, by the way. So hits a big one right on the army. The Raven comes over, can only drop a single auto turret as it gets feedbacked.
Wow.
So we talk about the Raven, it's dead. It's generated pretty much no value. This army gets just absolutely gobsmacked. But the drop in the main, this is, I guess, the one thing for uThermal that is going right is able to unpower some of the workers. This Widow Mine gets the second shot off, so 13 probes been killed, but still has Zealots fighting the SCVs inside that mineral line. There is the recall to bring that army back over. One of the medevacs dies, fully loaded. He's going to try to drop in the natural, but the shield battery is helping to keep some of these probes alive. And there it is, GG uThermal. Taps out, and DnS